Welcome to the Classical Commons Podcast, a conversation exploring the ideas, the people, the trends in classical ed. I'm Rob Jackson, founder of this digital platform, connecting classical school communities nationwide to talent and other resources. Well, today, our guest is a colleague, a friend, Patrick Halbrook, founder of Paidea Graphics, but he's a rhetoric and humanities teacher first at Cary Christian School and the co-founder of Paidea Graphics, which specializes in websites, planners, publications, all kinds of stuff. We'll talk all about that, but welcome to you, Patrick. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Rob. Appreciate the opportunity to be on with you and appreciate the work you're doing.
Well, I really would love for you just to tell our listeners, our viewers, a little bit about how you got involved in classical education, because every one of our stories is sui generis or idiosyncratic. Yours is intriguing, so I'd love for you just to tell us a bit about that entree.
Yeah, well, I'll combine that a little bit with my interest in web design, because originally in high school, I thought I was going to go into computer programming or website design or something like that. And I spent a lot of time on the computer, taught myself HTML. This was back in the late 90s when, you would have a high school kid who knew HTML and hire him to do your website because no one else was really doing it. So I did a little bit of that. But then I went to college and went to a small liberal arts school. Ended up studying the Bible and great books, and was just all in for studying the humanities. Decided I wanted to go into teaching. And it was while I was in college that I first heard about classical education. At first, I thought I was going to go the college professor route, and then found out, hey, there's this whole world of classical education out there that was just as appealing, honestly. So I started teaching at Cary Christian School in 2006. Sometimes people say, were you really old enough to be teaching at that point? Because I look pretty young. And at the time, I was often mistaken for a high school student. There was a rumor going around that I was some kind of German exchange student, which is why I didn't wear a uniform. Apparently, I heard later. But I just started my 20th year teaching, and I love it. And I've taught all kinds of middle and high school classes, humanities and rhetoric and theology and history. But back to how I first heard about classical, it was actually randomly listening to the radio one day in college, and it was R.C. Sproul's radio show. And he was talking about classical education on there and mentioned Dorothy Sayers and some essay called The Lost Tools of Learning. So I looked that up, thought it was great. And then after college, moved to an area where there happened to be a classical school. And so that's how I got started in classical.
R.C. Sproul made mention of Dorothy Sayers in The Lost Tools. That's fascinating. You just never know how it's going to happen. Know how it's going to happen. You've taught, as you mentioned, this is your 20th year. And so with 2 decades, you've seen a few changes, no doubt, generation after generation, cohort after cohort. What in that period of time would you say are some of the major trend lines, some of the major shifts or changes or developments that you've seen inside of classical education?
Yeah. So I guess at least speaking for myself and our school, which I assume is part of a larger trend, but I think when I started, I assumed, hey, we've got this whole classical thing figured out, and whatever we're doing, that's exactly what we need to be doing. And so we call our halls the grammar and the logic and rhetoric halls, and we read a few particular books, and that's about all we need to do. As the years went on later, I realized it's really a process of figuring out what you're trying to do. And so I think the thing everyone wonders about is, like, what exactly does it mean to be classical? Is that at worst a marketing strategy? At best, is it something authentic that's been recovered? And over the years, certainly I've seen how the idea of the trivium and quadrivium is a big part of that. The study of great books is an important part of that. The skills I see our students graduate with, some pretty impressive rhetoric skills and thinking skills. That's certainly the fruit of whatever this classical thing is, especially when they get off to college and they find out they're well above any of their peers. I think the appreciation for the past and what we can learn from the past is a huge part of what it means to be classical. And so those are things I've seen. For me, I've come to understand better. I think I've seen others pick up on. And also, I don't know if anyone's talked about this, but sort of the move from more of a defensive posture, sort of a almost culture war. Like, you read Dorothy Sayers, and she's all about, we send people off into like into battle unarmed, right? So we need
Yeah.
to begin. And I can
Right.
definitely see how, especially in, the 90s, 2000s, what people perceive as culture wars, like we got to protect our kids. But classical is much more than just a posture of defense, right? It's
Right.
giving people something to love, right? Giving people something to live by. And so we're not just training up critical thinkers who can catch people in their logical fallacies, but we're giving them something that's really true and good and beautiful to live by. And so I think those are a few of the shifts that I've seen, at least in my thinking. I think is probably representative, not just to me.
I really love the beauty, the naivete, better said, right? Of, hey, we've got this all figured out. I'm just going to plug in and become an apprentice and become a master teacher someday. We got it all figured out at the get-go in 06. Not quite. And of course, we continued to watch it evolve. I'm really intrigued by the fact that you've been teaching rhetoric for what, a decade or so, maybe more.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Rhetoric is such an important component. And I saw in my own experience with a large network, how that was something we had to work hard after the first 10 years to really revitalize or make integral. It doesn't happen, automatically. What have you seen in rhetoric classes that maybe gives you hope that there really is something beyond catching people in fallacies, as you said, to give the next generation or equip them to advance and promote human flourishing, right? What did you see in rhetoric class?
Yeah. Well, first off, whenever I tell someone I teach rhetoric, I always feel like I have to defend myself a little bit because rhetoric's kind of a dirty word, right? You think of politicians and their rhetoric. And for that reason, I'll talk in a second about our vision of rhetoric, but I think one of the things that's a challenge for classical schools is that hardly anyone, in my experience at least, goes in saying, what I really want to teach is rhetoric. I've known a couple people like that, but usually I'm a humanities or literature person or something. Right. And then we need a rhetoric teacher, and it's sort of like the logic teacher, right? Oh, you look like you can think. Okay, you can teach logic. And you look like you can speak and talk pretty well. We'll let you teach rhetoric. And so there's always an on-the-job learning curve. And so the first few years of rhetoric can be a little bit rough, but at least we know that it's something for students to practice, right? So even a crummy rhetoric teacher, if the students are giving speeches a lot, at the end of the year it can go, at the beginning of the year I didn't want to be in this class, but now it's not so bad. So at least that's some kind of success.
Yeah.
But what I love seeing it for our students, and our students do 4 years of rhetoric all throughout high school. And the culmination is the senior thesis class, which I guide them through. And what I love about that is not just that they can write a long paper, though they can, and not just that they can get up and give a speech in front of a whole bunch of people, though they do that. And then they answer a lot of questions that I and a couple other panelists get to ask. But our focus is really, listen, a lot of the assignments you do, you give it to your teacher, get a grade, give back, do another assignment, give your teacher, get back. Here's an opportunity for you, and our thesis presentations are in front of a big audience. You don't have many chances in life where someone just hands you a microphone and says, talk about whatever you want.
Yeah.
And so pick a topic that matters to you, pick something that is meaningful and would be helpful, that would be intellectually, morally stimulating for other people to be able to hear about, and use it well. And I think that motivates students a lot. That's what they tell me, that rather than just it being another assignment or some final gauntlet that they have to manage to get through, they're doing something meaningful, and there's a purpose behind the paper and the speech and their words. And so I think the more that we can help students see the real value in that, and that it's being done for a purpose for the benefit of others, then the more they'll internalize how important it is.
Yeah. You, I assume, have seen the range of quality in those senior theses, those presentations. What were one or two of the most memorable that really stuck with you?
Yeah. One of my favorite, some of my favorites are the ones where they end up making them really interdisciplinary. Like, can video games be a form of art, is one from years ago. I still find that kind of intriguing. One I really enjoyed from a couple of years ago was about transhumanism. And what I loved about it was the student looked at this kind of modern idea of transhumanism and looked a lot of contemporary articles and books. But then she brought in Dante and Aristotle and the Bible and showed that there's this newish concept, transhumanism, that, yeah, like the term's new and some of the aspects of it are new, but this idea of transcending humanity, becoming kind of godlike, even in a sense, that's an idea that's been with us for forever. And so that, I mean, I think that's the ideal kind of thesis, where it's being able to bring in some of the authors that we've read throughout high school and say, these are voices who still have something to say to us in our world today, and to be able to bridge that gap between here's what they knew, because human nature doesn't really change, and here's what we're experiencing today, and what light can they shed. Again, that idea of, are we willing to learn from people in the past, and how can we benefit from that?
Yeah, that great cloud of witnesses continues to sing forth, right? I mean, we still hear them if we have ears to hear. And of course, hopefully we're leaning into the tradition. Yeah. I'd like to switch gears just a little bit, because I invited you onto the podcast in part because I just think it's fascinating when teachers and other staff members associated with these classical schools get an idea that there's a need and they step up and decide to meet it. And from what I can tell, your little side hustle, Paidea Graphic, is just that. We've got it up here. Let me just make sure that it's going to come up on the screen. Folks can take a look at this for themselves, but paideagraphics.com. How in the world did you find time, amid teaching, running senior theses, and all the rest of it, to start this business?
So my wife plays part of the is part of the answer. It's a family business, and she and I do this together. So that's part of the answer. But and also, they don't make me teach new classes anymore, so I'm there's less of a learning curve there. Although I did enjoy all the 12 or 15 classes I've taught over the years. But like I said, back when I was in high school, I thought I might go into something with computers or computer science or graphic design, and over the years did continue off and on to do some freelance work on the side. But a couple of years ago, my wife and I decided we wanted to expand our business a bit, and really what better realm to do that in than what we knew best, which was classical education. Our kids are classically educated. I've been in the classical school for a few years, and I've been working with our school, Cary Christian, for about 10 years on the school's website. So we started Paidea Graphic Design about 2.5 years ago, and really our goal is to serve classical schools doing websites. We do student planners. About, I think, 30 schools are using our student planners this coming year, and other promotional materials, brochures, and those kinds of things. Sure. And we saw a need, partly because a lot of classical schools are frustrated with working with agencies that don't really get classical education. So they're trying to make the websites look all high tech, or putting iPads on the homepage. And okay, that's not quite what we're going for. There's an aesthetic to it that we want. Sure. And so the idea that there wouldn't be a learning curve for us in figuring out what classical is. We already know what it is. Instead, what we can do is come in and just tell us about your particular school, and because not every classical school is identical. So help us understand your school and how you want to present yourself, and we'll help you do that in a way that's creative and elegant, and you're able to get your message out. Yeah. Well, interestingly enough, you just presented with one of your colleagues a workshop this past summer entitled The Rhetoric and Aesthetics of School Marketing and Communications. Now, I'd love for you to just give us the quick primer. I know we can't go all in, although it's on your website. We've got it here, again, paideagraphics.com, so they can go to the top there and click the link if they want to get a little bit more of the slides that you gave. But could you give us a quick overview and just tell me how it was received? Like, what did the audience think? What were their questions? Is there a hunger for this? Yeah, it went really well. So I presented it with Gene Lichty, who's been doing development and marketing for a little longer than I've been involved in communication. So I've worked with him for a few years and wanted him to be able to give some of the practical side, and I gave a little more of the theoretical side, and also practical when it comes to things like websites. But
Sure.
Our overall idea was just how can we bring marketing, how can we bring that marketing strategies and website design into better alignment with schools' values. So we talked about a few things like when you're designing a website, if you were to ask your rhetoric teacher how to do it, well, he'd probably say, well, why don't you start with logos, pathos, and ethos, right? What's the logical appeal? What's your message about, someone's visiting your website? They're asking, why should I go to this, send my kid to this school, right? The pathos, the emotional appeal, like what does it feel like to experience being at this school? How are you communicating that with your photos and your videos and your testimonials? What about the ethos? I think that might be the biggest one. How are we communicating our credibility as a school through not just what we tell you about ourselves, but even how well the website's taken care of? Is it professional? Do we hold it to the same kind of standards that we would hold our students to when they're, say, writing papers or turning in assignments? So that was part of what we were getting at. And Gene had a lot of really good tips for even practical things like going to. I help him design promotional cards for families from schools to give out to prospective families, and they'll do things like take it to your church and have a stack that people can pick up. And so we talked about some strategies like that, but it was it was well received. We got a lot of questions, talked with a few schools afterwards about redoing some of their websites. There were I guess some of the questions were very specific. How do we do this particular thing?
Oh, sure.
For marketing, but overall we got some good feedback from it.
Were the audience members surprised by this connection between rhetoric and the aesthetics of marketing? Was that a new concept to them?
Yeah, I don't remember anyone specifically saying that, but in the years I've been going to conferences, I haven't really seen anyone make that connection.
Right.
And I think it's an important one to make.
Well, I remember one of the sort of premier rhetoric books of the last, half century on the art of rhetoric begins with an ad campaign and shows that visual rhetoric is, that rhetoric is implicit in this visual advertisement, right? And this is just sort of a magazine entry. And of course, anytime we turn on the tube or something comes over the wire, we're watching an advertisement. They're exercising a form of rhetoric. And maybe that's, as you said earlier, of the politicians, part of why we have a bit of a pejorative understanding of rhetoric, but it doesn't have to be so. And moreover, it can be used for the good and should be used for the good, right? To advance and promote something like these classical schools that we're working with. So I was really taken by the fact that you cited Roger Scruton, and maybe our viewers and listeners, some will be familiar, others will not, but I consider him the doyen of aesthetics. In the past half century, he's perhaps the most articulate and persuasive presenter on these matters, and made the case that beauty is crucial. It's essential. We live for it, quite honestly. And you had him prominently on Paidea Graphics' website and said, this is actually how it works. Truth, goodness, and HTML. That's cute. Tell me a little more about what you take from Scruton in terms of your work and the work you'd like to do with schools.
I was reading Roger Scruton's book a couple of years ago, which I happen to have with me right here, but it's his Beauty, a Very Short Introduction. And this is one of those deep philosophical books where a lot of it I'm going, I'll need to read this 2 or 3 times to make sure I really get what he's saying.
Sure.
But I was delighted to see that he brought up, even in passing, the concept of websites. And I want to read just this short passage where he talks about a concept that he calls minimal beauty. And he says, things can often be compared and ranked according to their beauty. And there is also a minimal beauty in the lowest degree, which might be a long way from the sacred beauties of art and nature, which are discussed by the philosophers. There is an aesthetic minimalism exemplified by laying the table, tidying your room, designing a website, which seems at first quite remote from the aesthetic heroism exemplified by Bernini's St. Teresa and Ecstasy, or Bach's Well-Tempered Clavier. You don't wrestle over these things as Beethoven wrestled over the late quartets, nor do you expect them to be recorded for all time as the triumphs of artistic achievement. Nevertheless, you want the table, the room, or the website to look right, and looking right matters in the way that beauty generally matters, not by pleasing the eye only, but by conveying meanings and values which have weight for you and which you're consciously putting on display. What I love about that is, no one's designing a website thinking this is going to hang in a museum someday. No one's making a brochure going, let's frame it, unless maybe it's your first brochure from a new school. That's not the point of these things. We're not creating some masterpiece for all time, but there can still be something beautiful about it, like laying a table, tidying a room. You could even think about those things as acts of hospitality, which a website, in a sense, should be an act of hospitality as well. But I love this phrase where he says, whatever you do, even something as simple as how you set the table, is conveying meanings and values which have weight for you and which you're consciously putting on display. So one of the questions that a school could ask as it's evaluating its own website is, are we conveying the meanings and values that we want to? That would, of course, be through the text, but also through the pictures, through the design, the style of it, the colors, all of those things that go into graphic design. And so I love how Roger Scruton pulls that out, that we don't have to think of aesthetics as always some masterpiece from the Renaissance, but we do want to have something like a website or a marketing campaign or a planner or whatever it is be in line with what we value and what we're trying to communicate about ourselves and what we care about.
Without question. As I was looking at a couple of the websites, you have a lovely portfolio there online that folks can look at if they're interested. And I think there's something I would like for you to maybe spell out just a few of the things that you consider sort of principles, if you will, of this work. In other words, if you're going to create that sort of hospitable and minimal introduction to your school, that this isn't a grand masterpiece, but what are some of the principles that are guiding you and that you're kind of working through with school leadership to appropriately frame and present those meanings and values, right, of the school?
Yeah. Probably the problem that I hear the most when we start working with a school is it's too cluttery. There's too much on here. There's lack of direction. And that's the same problem a lot of student papers have too. That's the same problem a lot of senior theses have. Pick a thesis. What are you arguing for? Where are we going with this? And so when I'm looking at a website, I even think about it similarly to how I approach a student paper. With a student paper like a thesis, you've got that main point you're trying to get across, and everything else is support to help communicate that. And same with a website. Most of the time you're designing a website, you think about what's our call to action. What do you want people to do? They want to sign up for a tour or get on our email list or whatever it might be, or apply now, right? Every website's favorite phrase, apply now. And so that's one thing you want to have in mind, that kind of focus, and to be able to prioritize what you want to communicate. And so that would be, as far as the message or the logos goes. And then the pathos of the site, is the color scheme, does it look, classical in a sense? That's a little bit subjective, but I mean, some color schemes definitely don't look very classical, at least in my humble opinion. And the fonts and just how everything's arranged on the page. So I like to say that graphic design is visual rhetoric. And so when you're looking at those things like the colors and the arrangement, or you could even think in terms of like the 5 canons of rhetoric, you have things like arrangement and style, and the arrangement of a paper you could compare to the arrangement of the parts on a site or some kind of visual material. So you can think about all those connections.
Well, I've wondered about this because, I'm sure you have found yourself annoyed, as I have, with the pop-ups and the variety of things that now sort of come streaming out of that website when I visit. And I wonder if occasionally we should pare back and maybe approach the websites for these schools with a clear call to action, but a clarity and a minimalism, as you said earlier, that really doesn't distract or create too much busyness, as you put it earlier. Again, these are all functional elements. It's both what's visually presented, but also the dynamics of a website, and its tracking mechanisms and all of that, and the desire to capture your email and so forth. This says something, right, about the institution. There's a rhetoric there implicit. Mm-hmm. Are there any particular next stage or kind of next wave developments that you're seeing in web design that you would anticipate should be evaluated, maybe adopted, but judiciously so, for schools, for classical schools?
Mm-hmm. Most of the websites, well, all the new websites we do are in WordPress. And one of the things I like about that is it's got so many plugins that you can use, but it also allows us to really, you could say, partner with the school so that doing a simple update is something that we can take 5 minutes to train someone from the school to do. Right. You got to change the dismissal time or something like that. Sure. And then you don't have to go through your web designer and, wait on it and all of that.
Right.
So that's something that in the past hasn't always been possible with certain website platforms, and not all of them are set up that way right now. But I think to me, that's important that the schools got at least some limited ability to do those kinds of updates. And if it's a major overhaul or adding something more complicated, then we can do that.
Sure.
One thing, there's a couple of tools that people don't always know about that some of them are free online. If you do a Google search for something like Dead Link Checker, mm-hmm. you can find a website where you'll actually put in the URL of your site, and then it will find all of the broken links on it, which is great.
404s, man. Oh, drives me crazy.
And I'll run it on my own sites and find broken links. Sure. I had a blog article about broken links and found a broken link on that site. It's you just have to check it like every month.
Yep.
Blog articles, especially, someone will, the head of school will put up a blog article linking to some, BBC article or something.
Yep. And it's gone.
It's gone later. So that's definitely helpful to do. In a sense, just the most low-tech thing, just reading through your website regularly, make sure that you're not announcing spring breaks coming up when it's summer, and making sure the head of school who left 5 years ago isn't still on the page.
Is not still there.
I've seen that before. One thing I'm working on right now, I don't have this set up yet, but some of the newer AI programs can help you spell check your site. That's been harder to do in the past. Everyone uses spell check in Word or Google Docs.
Sure.
But that's been harder to do with websites for a number of reasons. But there are newer ways with some of the AI capabilities where you can have it browse your site and do a spell check, and I've been starting to do that and finding things that were misspelled for a few years and hadn't noticed. So I guess one of the things that newer technologies helped with is just being able to make things easier to design. I rarely ever code in HTML anymore. It comes in handy once in a while.
Yeah.
But those kinds of things that make it easier and can help make your site look better. But then also those things to help you check for dead links, check for spelling errors, and keep it up to date so that it looks like it's something that you take care of.
That's right. And we should take care of that table. Well, let me ask you one last question, Patrick. As you know, Classical Commons exists to serve the needs of leaders, teachers, and even parents that are working in classical settings, right? Some are at home, hybrids, you name it. So what words of advice would you want to give to that population, those folks who are working to beautify their own websites and their materials? What would you encourage them to do? Just a simple kind of 1, 2, 3 first steps.
Mm-hmm. Ask your rhetoric teacher to look at it. Ask your art teacher to look at it. You've probably got people at your school who'd be glad to give some suggestions. People who have, and I think that's one of the things that I'm trying to do that I haven't really seen done before, is just make that connection between rhetoric and marketing, because probably your rhetoric teacher will be able to make a few suggestions. So that would be one thing, someone who's got an eye for design. And also, you don't have to. I'm encouraging everyone to, have a beautiful website. That doesn't mean you have to bust your budget. That doesn't mean you have to make it super high tech, but it does mean giving some care into thinking about how it looks, keeping the content up to date, and thinking carefully about who are we as a school? What are we trying to communicate? How can we not just tell, but how can we show that? I think a lot about that phrase, the medium is the message, that most of us learned from Neil Postman, though he got it from Marshall McLuhan.
Right.
But, even something like a website or a brochure, if the medium is the message, then it's so much more than just throwing up some text on the web and putting up a button so that someone will sign up for an open house, but finding someone who's able to understand how those things go together and understand how aesthetically it can best communicate rhetorically who you are as a school and what you're trying to say.
Well said, Patrick. Well said. And I do think you've found a niche here that is much needed to be addressed. Love the idea that aesthetics and rhetoric fit hand in glove, and that our classical schools could take leadership in this regard, at least start to clean things up a bit, and then start to see forward into the future as we advance and develop a better eye for these things with help from people like you and your wife and your team. So thanks for joining us today.
Thanks so much, Rob. Enjoyed it.
Join us weekly on the Classical Commons podcast for updates on this renaissance in classical liberal arts education. Learn more by subscribing to this podcast and our bi-monthly newsletter.